If you love home decorating ideas, go visit your local thrift shop. Thrifting is a treasure hunt that brings unique treasures and unexpected finds. Welcome to the Chic Show. I found this metal bucket in my thrifting adventures. I think it was probably to hold long matches, like to light a fireplace with. I'm not positive, but I'm going to be adding one of IOD's Fairy Tale Florals rub-on transfers. I always keep all of my scraps because you never know when you can use them. So I'm just using the transfer tool, rubbing it down, then I'll rub it down again with that backing paper just to make sure it is adhered nicely. And that is really all this piece needs. I thrifted 2 of these metal pieces and they came with magnets, but I'm going to be covering up the center part of this with some Fusion paint. Fusion paint does have a built-in sealer, so it's an all-in-one paint, so it will only need one coat. I'm going to use some gold rub and buff just to freshen up the gold around the edges. Now I'm using one of IOD's stamps. This is the Waltz stamp from the spring release, and I'm just going to be inking that up with some black ink. It's just an ink pad from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be stamping that onto this metal sign. Once the ink is completely dry, I'm going to be transferring on these birds from the spring release. I believe it was called Katarina, also from IOD. If you're not familiar with Iron Orchid Designs, be sure and check them out. They have beautiful products that help you make beautiful things. Off camera, I did add a couple of other scrap transfers to the left, and then I added the magnets that it came with back on. Now this is a cute little memo board. This is a sunflower print that I actually got in a book that I thrifted, and I really loved it, so I've been saving it for a project just like this. And I'm using this thrifted wood frame. I'm going to give it a couple of coats of cake batter by DIY paint, but you could use any yellow paint that you like. DIY paint does need to be sealed in, so I'm sealing this in with DIY's Big Top, and this will allow my yellow paint to show through on the next step. I mixed together some milk paint in Black Lantern. Milk paint does tend to crackle a little bit and allow that yellow paint to show through, so that's what I'm going for. But if you don't have milk paint, you could use chalk paint and just use a sanding sponge and get the same look. I'm applying a second coat of the milk paint, and then I will use my heat gun to dry it, and that will usually speed up the crackling effect. You could also use a crackling medium. Lots of different companies make them that you could use under your chalk paint as well. I chose to age it a little bit more by using my sanding sponge, so I just sanded around the edges and some places on the top just to make it look a little more vintage and rustic. Let me know what you think about this little sunflower print. If you're like me, you pick up these doilies anytime you see them in the thrift store. But what do you do with them all? For this project, I'm going to be covering one of these little Dollar Tree pumpkins that I have already painted previously into just a neutral color. This is a yarn needle and just some jute twine, and I'm going to be very careful not to damage the doily, so I'm going in between all of the little stitches, and I'm going to cinch up opposite sides. You can kind of see what I'm doing here. So I'm going one side to the other, and then go from the other side to the opposite side, and then I'll do it even 2 more times. So essentially you're doing this 4 times. Once I have it all cinched up around that pumpkin, I just tie it off with that jute twine. Now I'm going to use some fall florals and foliage to press down into the center of the pumpkin in the gaps of the doily so that I don't damage it. For the second pumpkin, I'm using some drop cloth. And again, I'm just using some thin twine and a yarn needle, and I'm going to cinch up the edges of the circle and then gather it up around that pumpkin. Now I'll pop that pumpkin in, cinch it up at the top, and it doesn't fit exactly, but that's okay because it's not going to show. I'll tie it off at the top, and then I'm going to be using some lace that I removed from an old blouse, and I'm going to cinch it up the same way that I did the drop cloth. Now it looks like a collar on the top of my pumpkin or fancy pumpkin leaves. I just tied that off at the top, and now I'm going to add a little wooden piece for the pumpkin stem. This is actually a wooden candle holder, I believe, so I'm going to fill in that bottom hole, and then I'm going to give it a coat of Fusion Antiquing glaze. Once it was dry, I went back with a little bit of jute twine and I hot glued that just around the bottom, and then I glued the stem to the top of the pumpkin. This has kind of a granny chic kind of vibe to it. I have saved the best for last. This is my favorite. I thrifted this little frame at the Goodwill bins, and I made this image on Canva, and I printed it out, and I'm going to be placing it into this frame. First, I've got to remove the backing off the frame and then take out the filler pieces or the backing pieces. And gosh, there were lots of little staples in here, and they were very difficult to budge. Once I got all the pieces removed, I traced around the image and cut it out so that I could kind of see where it was going to fit into the frame. I knew I needed a mat for this picture to cover the white part, so I took some watercolor paper and I put it into my silhouette cameo and I cut out a mat. I placed my mat down into the frame and then added my sunflowers and the backing pieces. And look how beautiful this is. I have to admit, I am not a sunflower girl, but I absolutely love this artwork. Thanks so much for joining me on this thrift shop adventure. I hope these home decorating ideas inspire your next thrifting trip. I would love to know which of today's projects was your favorite, and if you're looking for more inspiration, check out this video right here. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook and my website, lachicshop.com. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to share the chic. Bye now.